So just to be clear, should the FBI interview all three of Brett Kavanaugh's accusers?
It wouldn't bother me at all. I think the FBI should interview anybody that they want within reason.
Should Brett Kavanaugh be interviewed by the FBI?
I think so. I think it's fine if they do.
Real scratchy. Welcome back to Harville. Despite the president's word on Monday that the FBI should have a free hand in conducting their background investigation of Judge Kavanaugh, there's mounting concern today, Thursday, that the Bureau didn't do a thorough job. Today's 46-page report is the product of a 5-day inquiry, consisting of 9 FBI interviews. That's it. Neither Christine Blasey Ford nor Judge Kavanaugh were interviewed at all, nor were numerous potential corroborating witnesses referred to the FBI by Kavanaugh's accusers. And several took to sending their own unsolicited statements to the FBI in hope that they'd be heard. However, current and former FBI officials confirmed to NBC News yesterday that agents have not been permitted to talk to many of these people who want to talk to them. Likewise, Bloomberg's reported yesterday that the FBI hasn't interviewed Brett Kavanaugh or Christine Blasey Ford because it doesn't have clear authority from the White House to do just that. Well, despite those reports, Republican senators on the Judiciary Committee said today that no limitations who the FBI could or would not interview were made. Let's watch them play this game.
We did not come up with a list of people who the FBI should interview.
Just to be clear, that we did not give them a list of people and only these people they can speak with.
The FBI has gotten all the permission they need in order to interview whoever they think is necessary. There has been no one to corroborate any of the allegations made by Dr. Ford or by Ms. Ramirez, and the FBI has reported that back to us.
Well, joining me now is Natasha Bertrand, the staff writer for The Atlantic, and Greg Brower, former U.S. attorney and former senior FBI official. Greg, first of all, to you. Everybody's throwing a hot potato around. I mean, I watched the Republican senators today all say we had nothing to do with restricting it. We told them to do whatever they wanted to follow. The president said in the Rose Garden the other day on the Canadian trade deal, he said, well, I told them to go whatever they want to lead. And then we find out that all they talked to was a few people. They didn't went after the drunken belligerence thing that everybody was trying to figure out about, or any kind of really going after the Ramirez case. They didn't follow up all the leads that have been given to them. They won't even talk to the people coming forward.
Yeah, so I obviously don't know who said what to who, but I will tell you
Who tells the FBI what to do?
The White House does. But in my experience at the FBI and as a former federal prosecutor, I just can't imagine this investigation being done without the FBI interviewing both Ford and Kavanaugh. I think that makes sense to just ordinary folks.
They were told not to. Is that possible?
It is possible because the White House does guide the process.
Okay, here's the theory that's making the rounds. I got this from David Corn today, and I think he's reliable. I know he has a point of view, but he's reliable as a journalist. That they didn't want to interview her because they didn't want to interview him because they didn't think that he could handle an FBI investigation. And that about his drinking habits, his belligerence when he got drunk, the amount of drinking he did when he was young, the whole story, he couldn't stand the muster of in a one-on-one interview with an agent.
It's possible.
Because you'd have to lie.
It's possible. I think that it would have been limited anyway because the White House limited the scope, saying that they could only talk about the sexual assault allegations. So all of the witnesses who Blasey Ford has, who Debbie Ramirez has, that can talk about his drinking habits in high school and college, they would technically be off limits for the FBI.
But every incident that has been mentioned here in which he was blotto.
Exactly. And that's why Republicans have said that the Democrats are now shifting the goalposts and saying that his drinking has become the issue. But his drinking is central to it because he was drunk, allegedly, in every one of these incidents, as you said. So it is extremely important to not only get information that could corroborate the sexual assault allegations, but also information about his habits in high school and college.
Nobody assumed he would ever have exposed himself, to use the phrase we use, if he wasn't blotto, or drunk, of course. Deborah Ramirez, for example, his law school classmate, alleged that Kavanaugh exposed himself to her while at Yale, told the New Yorker, the people who were key to corroborating my story have not been contacted. I feel like I'm being silenced. This is Ramirez talking. Lawyers for Christine Blasey Ford also said in a letter to the FBI Director Wray, quote, the investigation conducted over the past 5 days is a stain on the process, on the FBI, and on our American ideal of justice, sir.
Yeah, I think the White House and the Senate Republicans sort of missed an opportunity here to take a big process foul call away from the Democrats. Had Ford and Kavanaugh been interviewed, had all of the Ramirez witnesses been interviewed, the Democrats still, virtually all of them would be opposed to this nominee, but they wouldn't be able to say that the FBI reopening was rigged or somehow wasn't full and complete. But
you're ignoring the very strong possibility they would have found what they went looking for.
Right.
a problem.
Right, exactly. And I think that the FBI, the people in the FBI are naturally, they want to get to the truth. And they are very, very frustrated, from what I'm hearing, that their hands are tied about this. And
So the G-men were what? Were they G-men or not? Were they acting as G-men or acting as tools of the White House?
I don't know what a G-man is.
Government man. Don't shoot G-man. You don't know the old 30s movies, but don't shoot G-man. The real FBI guys.
Ultimately, the White House is their client, so they are restricted, but they know and they recognize
Well, they're not
that
Pinkertons. They work for the United States government, not just the president.
Right, but it is, the White House is ultimately the client. Then, as Greg said, I mean, there are things that the White House can limit, that they're being used by the White House here, that they're being used by
maybe it's
the
people
Senate.
Chris, I would say that, as I mentioned, the White House does control the background investigation process, both the scope and the duration. But obviously, the Republicans, the White House, have an optics problem here. It just doesn't look right to a lot of folks that those two individuals were not interviewed as part of this. It doesn't. I just don't think it makes sense to people.
Okay, suppose the guy was up for Secretary of Defense like John Tower once was. He had a drinking problem. He had his face in a steak, whatever he's doing. But he didn't pass muster. Can you tell if you're doing a job check on somebody? Can you say, yeah, I want you to check this guy out for this job of being a member of the Supreme Court, Associate Justice, but don't go into this drunken mess thing of his, this Dr. Jekyll problem of his, because I can't. It's showing up in all these incidents, but don't check that one out. I mean, can you actually do that at the White House?
Well,
can you say don't check out the main problem?
That's not likely to happen because this whole process, the background process, exists for the White House's benefit. It's a way for the White House to
cover
vet
up
potential nominees.
But it sounds like you say they can give the FBI the job of covering up.
Well, normally they have no incentive to do it because the problem, if they say that to the FBI in the course of a normal BI, background investigation, and then later after the nomination is announced, something comes up, the White House will be embarrassed. So in my experience, the White House wants a very full and complete process.
Okay, let me ask you a question about the trail. Can the Democrats, if they get their act together, people like Feinstein, can they, if they ever get the House or the Senate back, can they subpoena the directions given by the White House to the FBI in this case, so they know how they restricted the operation?
Chuck Schumer is already talking about it. Chuck Schumer is already saying that
he doesn't have the subpoena power yet.
No, he doesn't. But the Democrats, I mean, the Democrats in general, they do want this directive because they think that it will
they in writing?
be the explanation.
Greg, are they in writing?
The directive for
From
this
Don McGahn to this character to the FBI. So we may never be able to find out what the restrictions were.
Well, I suspect that Democrats in the majority would likely want to subpoena witnesses to ask them those questions, and that'll turn into a big fight about privileges and other things.
But can you is it in writing, or is McGahn get on the phone with Christopher Wray and say, let's keep this tight? Can he pull that number? Keep this tight, just limit it.
Well, as I said, in the normal course, the White House counsel's office does provide that kind of guidance to the FBI, not for the purpose of purposefully not finding things, but just to kind of keep it on track, keep it within deadlines. But again,
we're talking Trump here, okay?
This is not a normal background investigation in any way.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.